I tested my vertical every day for 3 months, and here's what actually worked. What's up, guys? My name is John Evans, and I coach many of the highest jumpers in the world, like Donovan Hawkins, Dominic Gonzalez, Isaiah Rivera, Tony Crosby, Dylan McCarthy, a ton of guys with over 48-inch verticals. And in this video, I'm gonna tell you what happened when I tested my vertical every single day in 2017. I initially did this as a way to assess my readiness. Now, readiness is essentially a way to tell how prepared you are for a given training session. So the reason I was doing it was not to jump higher, but simply as a way to see how fresh I was or how fatigued I was for a given session. If your goal is to get more powerful, then you need to come into the session prepared to produce a lot of force, and vertical jump is an easy way to assess that. However, an unintended consequence of that is that I collected a ton of data, and the results were very interesting on what happened to my vertical jump when I was doing power training, sprints, and a ton of different exercises. So for example, if I came into the session and I knew that my cluster was anywhere from 30 to 33 inches, if I was closer to 33 inches, I knew that I was okay to push on the day. But interestingly, over time, my vertical started to climb up, and I started to see some interesting relationships. So the first thing is that it was completely random when I would jump high and when I would not jump high. So I would be testing it every single day, like I said, sometimes in basketball shoes, sometimes in weightlifting shoes, sometimes barefoot, and it was completely random. I never knew when I was gonna jump high. I never knew when I wasn't gonna jump high. I could be hammering squats in the weight room and power cleans and sprinting, and that didn't necessarily mean that I wasn't gonna jump high on that day or the following day. When I started testing, I was around 31 inches in weightlifting shoes with one step. At the end of the 3-month period, I had tested 37 inches multiple times with one step. My standing vertical started around 30 inches and got up to about 35.5 inches. The second interesting thing that I discovered is that the number one thing that improved my vertical during this period of time was adopting a jump strategy that mimicked my best movement pattern. So what that means, if I'm an athlete who's very, very good at power clean and I have very, very good technique, this means I'm not gonna use a lot of knee bend. I'm probably gonna be hinged relatively far forward, pushing my butt backwards. And when I get into my double knee bend, it's gonna be super explosive. When I started to adopt that jump strategy in my testing, I started to jump drastically higher. Now, in contrast, and I've observed this tons and tons of times, athletes who are very, very strong in squatting and keep a similar foot width will end up jumping significantly higher when they use a more knee dominant strategy, meaning they stay tall, push the knees forward, and do a squat-like jump strategy. If you're looking for an example, check out Chi Jumps. He has a very knee dominant strategy. He squats straight down, almost like an Olympic weightlifter, and explodes out of the bottom. If you want to look at someone that's a little bit more hip dominant in their standing vertical, then you can look at Isaiah. Now, approach vertical is a little bit different. If you have bad technique, then this still applies, but if you have good technique, then ultimately it's going to be different. Okay, the third thing that I learned that was really interesting is that my max power clean and max squat did not necessarily correlate with better jumping. So for example, if I came in and I max back squatted the week prior and I put up some crazy number I'd never done, let's say it was 330 pounds in a high bar deep back squat, and then I came out and I power cleaned 245. That did not necessarily mean that my vertical was going to go up. Real quick, if you're interested in getting coaching, go to THPStrength.com. Right now we're running an offer where it's 90% off. You can try it for 1 month. After that, it will go back to the normal price, but I think you will be incredibly surprised with the results that you get in that 1 month. Interestingly, the number one thing that correlated with whether I was going to jump high or not was how my knees felt. If my knees hurt, I was not able to jump high. If my knees felt good, I was able to consistently jump higher. This is one of the major reasons that I often say the number one determinant of how high you will jump is, are you healthy? If you're not healthy, you're not gonna be able to jump high, specifically when it comes to tendons, because those are force transducers. If you have a lot of pain in the tendon, you're not going to be able to apply a lot of force very quickly, which means you're not going to be able to jump very high. I've seen this also true in Isaiah's scenarios. If he comes in, his IT band hurts, his knees hurt, he's probably gonna end up jumping 44 to 43 inches. As opposed to him coming in completely healthy, he's probably gonna jump 50 or 51 inches. Something else that was incredibly interesting is that my sprint times did not correlate with higher jumps. I did notice that over time, my jumps got better as I sprinted more, but it wasn't necessarily that when I was running my fastest, I was jumping my highest. Now, I wanna be clear, this is specifically in regards to 2-foot jumping, standing and 1-step approaches. When it came to 1-foot jumping, there was a massive correlation with my power clean, my back squat strength, and my sprint times. During this period of time, I had my best high jump takeoff ever. I buried 6'4", probably could have cleared 6'8" on the jump, and I, to this day, have had a very hard time repeating that because I've not been able to accumulate the same volumes that I had when I was in grad school. I believe the reason this happened is because high jump is a much more sensitive metric. I wasn't necessarily jumping a lot off of 1 foot at the time, and as a result, I think I was relatively fresh when it came to those very, very high force 1-foot takeoffs like high jump. When it came to 2-foot jumping, where it is a little bit more similar to squatting and power cleaning, and it is a little bit less sensitive to fatigue, I was able to maintain relatively high jumps during that period of time. I also noticed that it would take me months to unload from 1 foot jumping to have a good high jump session. Again, the more I jumped, the worse I did in high jump sessions. The less I jumped and the more I focused on general preparation, so my squat strength, my power clean strength, working on eccentric strength and isometric strength, the better that I jumped. Mind you, I also had very, very low plyometric volume during this period of time. It was very stiff, elastic contacts with very, very low volumes. Things like hurdle hops, maybe 4 sets of 5, things like depth jumps, maybe 5 sets of 1. And I noticed because the volume of those very intense exercises was low, I was able to benefit from them neurally, but not necessarily fry my nervous system when I went out and did 1 foot takeoffs. Now, this part is probably going to be the most interesting, and that is that during this time, I was the absolute worst at dunking that I've ever been. Correct. So all of my metrics were higher than they'd ever been. I was power cleaning 235, I was deep back squatting 345, I was power snatching 200. My sprint times were faster than they've ever been. I was running a 30-meter sprint with a hand start in around 4.05 seconds. My 10-meter fly was anywhere from 10.05 to 1.0, which is relatively fast for myself, but I was absolutely terrible when it came to dunking. Now, the reason for this is because I wasn't doing the skill that I wanted to get better at. Now, this is in contrast to what I said previously about high jump. And the reason why is because when you're jumping off of 1 foot to do a dunk, you're only taking 3 to 5 steps. As opposed to high jump, you're taking 10 steps. This means you have way more speed, way more momentum, and the contact is way more elastic. It requires you to have incredibly high frequencies in the brain, and you have to be very, very fresh to perform at a very high level. Whereas dunking, the ground contact times are relatively longer. You're able to push over a longer interval of time and maybe take advantage of impulse changing, where in high jump, you wouldn't rotate if you did that strategy. So to sum this up, high jump is more reflexive. It's more neurally determined, and it's something that takes a very, very high amount of neural drive. If you're a 1 foot jumper and you're trying to dunk, in this case, you can probably get away with pushing up more dunk sessions, and I would actually encourage you to do so. The reason why is because it's a less sensitive metric. The timing of lobs and learning how to use the ball in a jump is more of a determinant of whether you're gonna dunk well than it is if you're not comfortable with that and you don't set up a good takeoff. We also learned that jumping is task specific. So what this means is that if you wanna get better at a given strategy, you need to do it more. The more I did standing jumps, the better I got. The more I did 1-step takeoffs, the better I got. The more I did dunks, the better I got. The one caveat is that if you're running incredibly fast like you are in high jump, then it will fatigue your nervous system to the point that you won't be able to benefit from it. In this scenario, you'd want to get really, really good at high jumping when you're younger and can handle those high volume, highly technical sessions, learn the skill, and then ultimately push up all of your capacities so that you can perform well in the event. And lastly, we learned that vertical jump is strategy dependent. So if you're really, really good at power cleans, then you need to adopt a strategy in standing vertical jump that's similar to your stance in power clean, to how you do a power clean, to your double knee bend, and you're going to perform better. We also learned that if you're a squat dominant athlete and you're not as good at Olympic lifts, then you need to adopt a strategy that is going to mimic your squatting. That's the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.